Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am joined by the exceptionally wonderful, fantastic, brilliantly minded Dr. Elise Kalokerinos. Dr. Elise, would you be able to tell our lovely viewers at home what you have studied to become such doctor?
So my research mostly focuses on how people manage their emotions. So when things get a bit overwhelming, what are the best things to do to actually deal with that?
Extremely poignant to the idea of self-care, I think, and particularly in the way that we've managed the last 2 years and how we do all of that. I'm sure you've got a lot of studies, a lot of research.
We like to joke that COVID, while bad for almost everything, has been interesting for emotion researchers.
Great for emotion.
And suddenly everyone cares about what I do.
You are very, very important.
I was very popular at Christmas, yeah.
Oh,
didn't
God,
used to be. Now I am.
Now you're the it girl. I love it. In your personal experience, what does self-care mean to you? From your personal experience, professional opinion, it's a melding of the two.
Well, I think the important thing is it's not just, you know, painting your nails or going to the spa. Self-care is a lot broader than that. This is my personal opinion, I'd say. It's stuff like saying no to an extra thing that you don't need to do, and you know, getting up at 5 a.m. and exercising and getting to sleep early and all those horrible things that don't maybe feel, I guess from the emotion research perspective, they don't feel good right now, but they help you to feel good later and to manage later.
Yes.
And so I think that kind of broader perspective is how I would see self-care.
Is there any self-care rituals that are good, do you think are actually really good?
From a research perspective, there's not anything that I would say, well, there's a few things that are bad, right? Like, you know, binge drinking, this kind of thing. But there's nothing that's inherently good. There's a lot of things that are good for you, and so I think it depends what you're getting out of it. So if getting up at 5 a.m. and going for a run allows you to be in like a place where you can accept the day as it comes and like manage that, then that's good for you. And if you're not the kind of person for whom getting up at 5 a.m. and going for a run is going to give you that feeling of like, I can accept whatever comes, then that's not a thing that you should do. So I think it's useful to like reflect on these kinds of activities and routines and stuff that we do and think about what emotionally they might bring to you and like what your goal is in doing that thing, and is that serving you.
Yeah, I guess it is that thing of like, it's not actually a one-size-fits-all at all, which is, I suppose, what is pushed to us all
and it's
the time.
not even like a one-size-fits-you at every moment, right? Like, so we know one thing that helps you to feel better is distracting yourself. So like binge watching Netflix, for example. It's actually super effective if you feel really bad and you just need to distract yourself for a bit. But if you were to do that every hour, every day, it becomes bad, right? Like, because you're not moving past it, you're just like hiding it from yourself. So there's like also a time element in it that sometimes you just need to do that kind of bad for you but distracting kind of thing, and then at other times when you've got the time and the space, you need to do the more like hard work, kind of thinking differently about things or sitting with your emotions and trying to cope with them. There's not just going to be one thing that works for you and one thing that doesn't, and like trying a bunch of different things and seeing what works for you right now is kind of the best thing that we see, being a little bit flexible. Would you say that self-care, in just the conceptual idea of it, is mostly good for our mental health? Is it good for our mental health? Is it bad? I think it's mostly good in the sense that people are a lot more, so one thing that we need to be as people is like aware of our emotions as they happen, right? We need to pay a little bit of attention to them so we can know how we're feeling, and then from there we can know how we cope with it. And so I think people doing things like self-care, it encourages you to be in touch with yourself in a way that maybe we weren't so much before when we weren't as comfortable with mental health. I think where it gets a little bit toxic is where it's like you constantly have to feel positive and good, and we know that the pressure to feel really positive is bad for people. So I think good to be in touch with yourself, and self-care brings that. Bad to feel like being in touch with yourself has to mean I'm always happy and everything's always great.
So then on the flip side, I suppose the industry that we've built around it of this consumeristic, like, smile all the time, you have to feel happy, that is not great. And there's lots and lots of research that says the social pressure to feel happy is like toxic for us. So in a way, how does that differ from something like a positive psychology, or is that study of positive psychology is kind of just always?
I think there's a kind of ongoing argument among researchers about it, and what they think is the bad part is putting pressure on yourself to feel happy, and constantly pursuing that to a kind of degree. Instead, you're better off trying to feel fulfilled and sometimes that doesn't look like happiness and sometimes that does, and feeling kind of how you authentically feel. So if that's good, that's great, then there's no reason not to broadcast that and to enjoy that. But feeling like, I think the thing is when you feel bad, not feeling like that's not okay, and that's when it sort of starts to get like toxic, basically.
Yeah. So because you have studied emotions so widely, how do you think that emotions play in regards to this huge social media world as a whole?
Well, there's a couple of things. From an emotions perspective, and for someone who manages how people kind of deal with emotions as they come, an interesting thing for us is that social media is kind of a different medium and a different strategy that people use, sometimes to their benefit and sometimes not. There's some interesting research looking at young people in particular who find that they can actually get a lot of emotional benefit out of sharing with their friends on social media.
Wow.
And so it's not necessarily fully an evil, right? It's another avenue. But then researchers who look at things like social comparison, they really don't like things like Instagram in particular, because people curate this kind of version of themselves and they put up their like very best life on the internet, and then we compare ourselves to the best moments of someone else's life, and so no one ever puts up the boring negative everyday routine on Instagram. They only put up the cool trips and that kind of thing. And so when we make comparisons to people who we think are more fun or exciting than us, we feel like really bad.
Do you think that there's a benefit within showing those negative aspects of our lives as well?
I think so, to the extent that you're doing it in a way that's kind of accepting it and not a way that's venting. So we sort of I do a little bit of research on how we like use other people to help us manage our emotions, and the worst thing that you can do is sort of just vent to someone without having any kind of endpoint, even though it's really fun. People like doing it. It doesn't help you manage anything. But sharing your emotions in a way that's like a bit more thoughtful and like helps other people come in and help you feel better. And I think you could use social media for that, kind of putting out a call and using your friends to help you to feel better. It just you have to manage the venting part, which could be hard. And most of people's negative emotions you see on social media are more like venting. They're just like yelling out into the void, not looking for any help in return.
I get that kind of question of when is it performative and when is it constructive in the ways that we express ourselves.
There's some really cool research, and I don't do it, but I really like it, that scrapes people's Twitter and Facebook posts and pulls out emotion words and stuff and looks at like how far they go. And the negative Twitter posts, for example, go much further. People love looking at people being really angry and upset on the internet, but whether that helps them to feel better is probably another question entirely. But people like to watch negative stuff. So I know like the social media researchers often look at the difference between using it actively and passively too, and they find active social media use where you like post stuff and you interact with people. That's can be good for your well-being to an extent, but passive use, like where we sit and watch people fight and we're like, oh, that's bad for your well-being.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so if you're using it, you're best off to use it in ways that like you can actually actively be sharing your life and commenting on other people's lives, and kind of getting that social value out of it.
So the mindless scrolling of
doom scrolling.
Of the doom scrolling. I know that myself in my personal life, I am very quiet on social media. I do not post. I just stand at a distance from things. So I should try and focus on making it more of an active exploration, and that will hopefully in turn help with mental health.
That's what the research would suggest, because I find that confronting as well. I don't really actively use my social media, but I think, it's also, it's not just like posting your own stuff, it's commenting on other people's stuff. And if you stop and you see, oh, that's a pretty photo, and you comment like, oh, what a cool photo, that actually kind of makes you feel good too, because you're like sharing positivity and making that connection, and so using your social media in that way can actually be kind of helpful.
What emotions do you think that I might encounter on this self-care social media journey, and how do you think is the best way to process these kind of emotions?
I would hope that you encounter a lot of different emotions. Like, I think that's sort of what self-care is. If you're trying to get in touch with yourself, then you'll hopefully be feeling some positive stuff, like some gratitude and some happiness as you do, and relaxation, I would hope, if you're doing stuff like spa days. But you probably also, especially because if you're going into it like trying a bunch of new things, you might feel a little bit like overwhelmed and stressed, or sometimes self-care stuff can also like make you reflect on difficult moments in your life, and that can be sad. And so I think it's useful to remember that all of those emotions have kind of useful functions for us. That's why they exist, right? If we couldn't feel things like being sad, then our lives wouldn't have a huge great deal of meaning, and we wouldn't be able to reach out to other people and get help when we needed it. So I think feeling I would hope that you encounter a lot of different emotions. Like, I think that's sort of what self-care is. If you're trying to get in touch with yourself, then you'll hopefully be feeling some positive stuff, like some gratitude and, some happiness as you do, and relaxation, I would hope, if you're doing stuff like spa days. But you probably also, especially because if you're going into it, like, trying a bunch of new things, you might feel a little bit, like, overwhelmed and stressed, or sometimes self-care stuff can also, like, make you reflect on difficult moments in your life, and that can be sad. And so I think it's useful to remember that all of those emotions have kind of useful functions for us. That's why they exist, right? If we couldn't feel things like being sad, then our lives wouldn't have a great deal of meaning, and we wouldn't be able to reach out to other people and get help when we needed it. So I think feeling all those emotions, even though it's hard and difficult, is part of self-care. And well, my like tip from my research would be, as you're traveling through that, trying to put specific labels on your feelings. We know that works really well to help you manage them. So, like, instead of just being like, oh my god, I feel really crappy about doing this, instead stopping and, like, reflecting on specifically, no, this is making me feel sad, it's making me feel angry, it's making me feel anxious. And when you kind of can get in touch with that, you can figure out why you got to that point. Like, oh, this is making me feel anxious because it's like something I've done before that I really hated, or it's making me feel sad because I'm remembering a time in my life that, So that's kind of, I think, a nice way to approach it. So I think that's like a multi-purpose way to process. It's just like putting a label on it, because that gets you to a place where you know enough about it that you can start to go down specific avenues. There's a few other kind of multi-purpose emotion regulation tips that I give people when they ask. One is accepting things non-judgmentally. So, I mean, you probably touched base with mindfulness on this journey, and I think the key part of mindfulness from an emotions perspective is this non-judgmental acceptance, that you're like, your emotions are there, they're a part of you, and you're not going to be like, oh my god, I can't believe I'm depressed today, just like sitting with that and being okay with it. Another one we train a lot is reappraisal. Which is maybe less self-care-y. It's basically rethinking the way that something makes you feel, or rethinking the thing that made you upset, or whatever kind of feeling you want to change. So the example I often give, because I teach at university, is failing something. And so you could view failing something or getting a bad mark as like the end of the world, or you could view it as like, okay, this is a learning experience for me. I've got a bunch of feedback, I can work with that feedback and I can get better. And that's reappraisal. It's like, okay, this isn't just a challenge, it's also an opportunity for me. So if you can sit with things like that and try and find, okay, well, where's the better angle or the different angle? So another way to do it is like, if I just think more objectively, so for example, if this had happened to my friend, I'd say to my friend, this isn't a big deal. And so, like, if you can take yourself out of your head and talk as if you would talk to a friend, that also helps. So that's reappraisal. It's a bit harder to do, I think, than just being accepting or labeling. And so reappraisal is like, you got to be like ready to kind of fully engage.
We have touched on it before, but do you have any recommendations? I know that we talked about between active and passive listening and participating in social media. Is there anything else that your study suggests that is a useful way for us to help kind of regulate how we use it and maybe not fall into those rabbit holes as much?
Well, one thing that we can uniformly tell you is like not a good thing to do for your emotions is what's called ruminating. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term before. It used to be something that everyone would look at me like, what, when I said it, and now it's sort of become a thing on the internet. And so what ruminating is from our perspective is like getting stuck in something, dwelling on it and not being able to let it go. And I think that things like social media and the internet allow us to get to those places pretty easily, because we're scrolling, we're reading a bunch of often negative information. Often we're on our own when we're doing this kind of thing, and there's nothing to like interrupt you out of the cycle of like seeing someone post something and thinking, oh, I wonder what they mean, is that about me? And so I think interrupting the cycle is maybe something that you want to have in your arsenal when you're going through this kind of journey, catching yourself when you're like stuck and angry, and then pulling yourself out of it. And the easiest way to pull yourself out of it is just to go do something else. Like, just pull yourself out of whatever it is, go do something distracting or fun until you're like in a place where you're like, okay, I can tackle this again. It doesn't seem like a big deal. Bringing it back to that like mindfulness of like, oh, I've been on here for a long time, or I've been doing this thing for a long time, and I don't feel good. And stopping that. I think it's really easy for us to autopilot our way through literally everything that we do.
Do you think something like a time limit is useful on the way that we consume social media, or just generally the apps? Is that useful, or is that I don't know, a hindrance?
That's a really interesting question. I know from a like self-control research perspective, I teach this in one of my classes. It's really good for your self-control to put limits on yourself, because we're really bad at when we have to make a decision in the moment. You know, the examples they always use in the research is like, you've got a plate of cookies in front of you and you don't want to eat as much sugar. It's really hard to just like not eat the cookies. But if you go from the beginning, I'm not going to buy cookies, and you never are encountering the cookies, it's way easier to manage them. And the same thing happens with social media. You're going to say to yourself, and I know because I do this, like, I don't need those barriers. I'll just know that I've spent too much time on Instagram today and I'll just stop. And you won't when you actually get there, because when you get there, you'll often be tired or distracted, or you don't want to do anything. So from that perspective of like, if you feel like things are interfering with your life, don't rely on yourself to stop it when it gets to that point. But I mean, it also is hard to say, put limits on things like social media when you keep them and use them to keep in touch with people. Like, and sometimes for good, like we've talked about how there's like research on teenagers that show that they use social media to make those connections. And so if you're like, okay, I'm going to block it, and then you really need to reach out to somebody. So that's the kind of costs and benefits of that. I think I subscribe to like using those things, but the ones that make it hard for you to access it, not that fully block it. And so if you really need to get back on whatever it is, that you can just like enter 5 passwords and know, okay, at the other end. Because if you're just doing it to stuff around, after like 2 of those passwords, you're like, come on, I shouldn't do this.
There is a way to regulate it.
But I think after I read that research, I definitely have those time blockers and stuff on my computer.
Okay, all right. Put the blockers on your computer.
I also have the iPhone one that aggressively tells me to go to bed at a certain
time.
I swear by it. Mine does this thing where it's like, sleep well. And I'm like, okay.
Yes, I will. Do you think that self-care in the entirely individualistic way, do you think a move to something a bit more like communal self-care is a better step in the way that we view the entire industry of it?
I think so, because I think making things social usually ends up with them being better. There's like a bunch of research being done in Australia actually on the benefits of being part of a group, and just like they call it the social cure, which I think is a nice name. Being with other people and being a part of something is really good for us. And so I think if you can do these things together, it can help offset some of the kind of costly aloneness, and you can also see how other people are struggling. You know, if you're trying something new, you know, you're trying to meditate. Meditation is very hard, as many have learned. And if you're all doing it and then you all can reflect afterwards, like, it's hard, but I'm making progress. It's not, you kind of get rid of that toxic, like, judgment of yourself, because you can use other people as a guide to say, like, oh yeah, this isn't something that's going to happen straight away.
So the way that we saw ourselves in a pandemic, not wanting to burden other people and them not wanting to burden us, because we've all gone through this quite global tragedy of sorts. Was there anything that we could have done, I guess looking back on it now, was there anything that we could have done that would have helped to have made us feel better in a social connection kind of way?
I'll give you a speculative answer.
Love it.
Because, hopefully I don't have any more data on this and everyone has the pandemic. But so the kind of research on how we support each other. So I think we may have already touched on the kind of venting to other people being bad, and the danger I think when we're going through stuff like a shared trauma like lockdown was, is that we just end up, when we do reach out to other people, if we do push past that, we end up just venting together and then we come out of it feeling a bit worse. So I think the kind of key is just reaching out to people and still doing that reaching out, because I think if we reflect on it on ourselves, we were all going through stuff. We're all probably still going through stuff. But it's not as if you weren't receptive to other people's stuff. It's just that I think none of us had the resources to do the reaching out that we would have usually done. Like usually you check in on your friends, and sometimes in pandemic times it feels like enough to just be checking in on yourself. So do the reaching out, but just like do the reaching out from the perspective of like you're both going to be in it together, and try not to fall into that like unproductive venting cycle. So talking through things in this more constructive way. So using these kind of reappraisal strategies together to try and like, so you talk through how you're feeling and I try and help you to find some meaning in that, and also validating what you're saying. So if you come to me and you're like, I feel horrible, it seems like I might lose my job because of the pandemic, I say to you like, that is horrible. I completely get it. I understand. So you're validated, which is important. And then I say like, okay, well, one thing that could come from this is you hate that job anyway. Let's like talk together about how you can find another job. And we go through your things, and then you do the same for me. Wow. And so those things do help. It's just like coming at it from that productive angle of like giving that validation and that support, and like that kind of concrete reappraisal. Let's think differently about it. And sometimes you don't have the resources for that, of course. But if you are gonna share with each other, because I think people should, and I think it's really important, just trying to like at least pull away from the venting part as much as you can. That's going to be one upside of all of this, is that we've all been through horrible, depressing trauma, and we know what it feels like now. Even people who had really charmed lives didn't have charmed lives the past 2 years. And so I think having empathy for other people, that how we felt during the pandemic is sometimes how they're living their lives, and what can we do to like be in touch with that.
This kind of was almost the best time for emotions to be studied and researched, and for people to find a commonality in something that was still quite taboo to talk about.
We all got to open about saying that we're not coping, and realize that nothing bad happens to you if you just share that you're not coping. People usually are like, what can I do to help? Or I understand. Like, and so I think making that open has been, it's a nice upside.
With your hindsight and your study and all of your amazing knowledge, do you think it is possible that I will become the most famous influencer on the planet by 5 p.m. next Saturday? Is there any hope in the world that this could happen?
I believe very firmly in optimism, so I think that you should be optimistic that you will get there. And I think you can also redefine famous to be whatever you want it to be. And so you can, because you didn't say the most famous in terms of followers. If you just have a few really engaged followers, you can just redefine that as famous.
I found it really interesting when, and it is a really, I think a lot of people have picked up on it now, but of like looking at someone's social media and just seeing the best parts of them, and then really not realizing that there is so much, either that's scripted or unscripted, behind that. There is so much more of their lives that we're not often seeing. It's definitely something very new, and I think, if we were to think about this 15 years ago or 10 years ago, this would have never really been within our wheelhouse, that there were not even the biggest influencers, just these kind of micro influencers.
I was just thinking about, it's like 15 years since I first got a smartphone, and it's like, oh my god, that was only 15 years ago.
I know, oh my god. And the world has like...
I feel lucky I didn't grow up as a teenager with like social media being a thing.
Yes.
Just the stuff you can't take off the internet once it's there.
I feel exactly the same way. But there are really good upsides as well. There's ways of social connection, but there can also be some really terrifying things.
The kids these days also know a lot more stuff, which is really like, things that you were scared of when you were a teenager and you didn't know who to ask. Now you just go to Google, and it's like there's someone there that's going to help you, and you can have a sense of community if you like, are going through a tough time, or there's something specific about your life. You can go and find someone on the internet who's doing the same stuff.
Awesome. I think we will probably wrap it up on that note of it's not all bad. Not all bad.
I'm an optimist. I like to think it's not all bad.
Fabulous. Oh, well, thank goodness someone is.
I kind of have to be aggressive.
Aggressive optimism.
Well, we do some research that shows that expecting stuff to be bad can sometimes be good for them. It's like protecting them against, if it does turn out bad, it's like, well, I always expected it to be that way, and it's okay. And we have some stuff that shows that that's really not the case. People who expect it to be bad, when the bad thing happens, they feel worse, and they still feel bad 6 months later.
Wow.
And so I just I try and take heart from my own research, and if I'm not going to learn from it, who is? And try and think about things in a positive way, in so much as it's possible. Sometimes it's just not possible, and you shouldn't like we were talking about before. You shouldn't
positive psychology, forcing of
you shouldn't force yourself to feel positive. But if you can think of things in a positive way, it does help.
Thank you so much for coming and chatting with me.
You're very welcome.
Today.
It was fun.
Oh, I had an absolute blast. I feel like I have learnt so much that is going to help propel me on this strange little journey.
I look forward to seeing how your follow account is at 5 p.m. next Wednesday.
Saturday. Thank you so much. Please adore Elise as much as you can. She's the greatest, she's the best. Wow, incredible. Thank you again. And that is all for today. So thank you so very much for watching. Feel free to do the classic things of leaving a like, giving a subscribe if you would like, and we will see you in the next video. Goodbye.